All right, everyone. Welcome back to the weekly SITREP. Today, we have Kyle in Austin, and we have Nate Webster joining us from sunny Hawaii. How are you doing, Nate? Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, well, dude, thanks, Wyatt, and thanks, Kyle, for having me on. I'm a big fan of your guys' content and kind of what you're doing, helping veterans transition. My name's Nate Webster. I'm a 2011 West Point graduate. I did about 10 years in the Army as an infantry officer and special forces officer. I ETS'd in 2022, started Harvard Law, and I'm a director at OneBrief. This is a military defense software startup. And I'm taking a year off between my first year of law school and second year right now, living out in Hawaii and helping kind of the business scale and understand our customers out here. And yeah, really excited to be on and talk to you about kind of all things entrepreneurship, the law, if you want to talk about that, and then our startup as well.
Yeah, how is it being a 10-year Army vet at law school with mostly kids that have never had a job? I've always thought that dynamic must be super weird.
I'm super lucky. I've got like an amazing cohort. Harvard Law, they kind of call it the New York of law schools because it's very big. It's about 500 per class. And so you get lots of different camps of people. And so I'm surrounded by a lot of like diversity in a way that I didn't quite experience in the Army per se. And yeah, there's an age gap for sure. I kind of thrive in that just because I feel like I'm learning from them and learning who I'm going to have to operate with in the future anyway. There's a pretty decent veteran community as well, so it's easy to plug in that way. But I'm the oldest in my section, or was, but I never felt that very viscerally, and it was great. Yeah, I mean, so far so good. No complaints. I mean, I think I maybe benefit from knowing what to take a little more or less seriously, as a function of age and experience. But no, it's really exciting to be around everyone.
Well, we're pretty excited to have a legal mind. As Kyle and I definitely lack that perspective most weeks. But Kyle, how was your weekend shaking out?
Oh, it was good. It was busy. Jeez, we're just like I don't know.
Did you take your full self driving out again this weekend?
Yeah, I'm using it everywhere. It's pretty amazing.
And it's as cool as they advertise.
It will it'll drive you all over the place. Pretty. Don't have to touch the wheel. In remarkably heavy traffic too. But yeah, no. I mean, it's good. Went to a golf course on Saturday with my daughter, and went to my buddy's 39th birthday on Sunday and everything. Watched some Masters. Did some home maintenance, standard, married man
dad life
things.
Yeah, it's good dad life stuff.
It is. It's all me and Home Depot or Lowe's, really. Best friends.
Suburban Austin dad life.
It's not a bad life until it gets super hot.
Well, it's only going to get warmer, so don't worry for those in Texas. Anyway, I wouldn't know about that because this week I accepted a job to the place behind me. I'll be in San Diego County. So when it's hot or when it's cold, I'll be sure to send you pictures.
You will not know because you'll be.
No, I will not. I will not know. Anyway, we want to go into a few topics today. The first will be the Iran-Israel conflict that went pretty hot over the weekend. The second is this building in St. Louis that sold for $3.5 million, and generally why commercial real estate is seeing this massive collapse and some cities seeing a death spiral. Third, talking about Walmart and the reason that some people at Walmart are making $250 to $400,000 to be managers at Walmart. So more than most any MBA will be making. And then lastly, kind of rounding it out with a discussion about entrepreneurship in relation to the founder of the Taiwan Semiconductor company, or manufacturing company. So first, we will start out with Iran-Israel. Most of us probably on Saturday got alerts to our phone or started to see some pretty shocking and frankly, it's sort of terrifying for what those of us who understand how quickly something like this can spiral. We got some pretty shocking news that Iran, for the first time in 50 years, had launched an attack on Israel by another country. So not the first time that Iran had done it, but the first time that an actual nation had attacked Israel. There's been plenty of terrorist and kind of these kinetic terrorist attacks like we saw on October 7th. There has not been a country that has attacked Israel in 50 years. So that got kind of scary. But Nate, why don't you break it down? Your organization's sort of close to this, and with what One Brief does. But why don't you break down kind of what the hell happened this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit about what's the true intention of the attack. It's very hard to tell. Yeah, I mean, this understanding sort of leadership dynamics and what they want out of it is difficult. But I mean, I have to surmise that Iranian leadership knew that this wouldn't be wildly successful, and so I'm thinking about is this just I don't want to say a theatrical or performative, but I think there is an element of and I don't understand the domestic politics of Iran deep enough to know, but was this just to sort of show face, knowing that the real impact of the attack would be relatively minimal given Israel's incredible defense capabilities, as well as they're shooting over Iraqi airspace, which they know that we're going to patrol as well. I think there was pretty good reporting on how many of these rockets and drones were shot down by U.S. fighters. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that and sort of what's the point of this to an extent.
Yeah, so Iran would say this was a retaliatory, like you said, they had to kind of save face, and this comes after Israel bombed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' headquarters in Syria, or their regional office. So it was a building next to the embassy, and Israel says the people in that building were responsible for helping plan terrorist attacks in Israel, October 7th and other things. So Israel says, hey, we're defending ourselves and we kill your generals. And Iran had to say something, right? But the attack they launched wasn't technologically that complex. They basically send small lawnmowers. They weren't quick planes, and then some missiles. I think the end result was they damaged a runway, and then actually one little girl died from shrapnel. Kyle, what did you think about when all this was going down? I think a lot of thoughts were probably racing pretty fast.
I mean, I think it's a couple things. One, it's kind of a complete lack of deterrence in the Middle East, right? Like they aren't scared of they aren't scared of doing an attack and the what the results would be, which makes it kind of scary, right? What if Iran had a nuclear weapon? Think how menacing they would be with it. And two, but on the other hand, it's also states kind of they feel like if something happens, they have to do something back, right? And it's the proportionality sort of stuff that we all learned about, and the law of war, and then that you continue to use when you're in the military. And it's okay, so they kill this general, Israel does, and now they're going to send all these drones and ballistic missiles over, but the Iranians briefed their partners or all these Middle East countries basically told them what their plan was going to be, and then those countries then immediately turned around and turned to the United States, who then promptly shot all of them down with the Arab alliance they have. And you're kind of okay, so is it just to save face, right? And then comes the question well, what does Israel do now, right? And it's all so bizarre, right? It's
yeah,
well, and they did the same thing when we killed one of their was it the Soleimani?
Yeah, Soleimani.
I don't know. It kind of feels like
they launched a few cruise missiles that kind of hit around a U.S. base, and President Trump kind of said, "Look," I think President Trump even said in an interview, this is what they had to do because nations have to retaliate, but this is over. We're not going to retaliate against them. And he signaled this come down. And for better for worse, in my opinion, I think that killing Soleimani was definitely a step up, and kind of showed Iran hey, stop screwing around in Iraq and killing our guys. But like you said, there's a lack of deterrence and a lack of Iran feeling like if we do something, something will happen to us. We can't really overstate how serious it is that a nation attacked. I mean, Israel is now saying we're going to retaliate, which is still scary. And Israelis that I know, I mean, I have Israeli classmates, and they're like, Joe Biden said, please, like, we need to not have this spiral, right? Iran signaled this. But my Israeli classmates are like, no, Iran has been screwing with Israel for the last 50 years. Like, yes, they haven't been doing it with their own missiles, with their own troops, but they've been funding terror that has killed us. And if we let them do this, they're going to continue to do it. And so we need to go. And it's like you said, it's scary to think, what if they would have sent over nuclear weapons or dirty bombs or something else? One thing that's interesting is kind of this coordinated reaction. Nate, what does One Brief do? You've all identified a gap in military planning, and I think it's kind of interesting to hear what that gap is, and a situation like this, how it's aided by a tech like what you guys make.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think just kind of like ground the conversation, like what One Brief provides. We all kind of serve at the tactical and operational level, and struggle with just the office suite that we tried to make work for planning, a bit of a mismatch of tools. One Brief is a custom-made planning tool for the Department of Defense, but really aids in all sorts of workflows. And what that looks like for the planner is that they're not bogged down and making sure their slides match their orders, match their sync matrix. All those things are now cohesively synced. And then that can scale. So, it's not just like the individual users' products are, synced properly, but now your entire organization is. And so if you kind of scale that up to one more, how do countries plan collectively? It's very hard. I mean, a lot of staffs are still trading PowerPoint decks back and forth, and that's not as fast as this sort of cycle of violence that we're seeing allows for good planning. And so one thing we kind of think about at One Brief is how can our software assist in collaborative planning at a really high echelon? I mean, I think that need is kind of more pressing now than ever. If you just think about like the complexity of an internal staff, a U.S. staff with similar planning processes and sort of theoretically the same understanding of a problem and how to attack it, you do that sort of at the multi-echelon or multinational level, and things get complicated quick. And so the more you can simplify your planning products, the better. And so I mean, it's going to be politically challenging and diplomatically challenging. That's a little bit beyond our purview, but we think about ways in which we can contribute to how planners can simplify the products they're using, and I think that's meaningful.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing to think. We talk about plans, and I think everyone thinks of like Independence Day, right? Where like countries are talking and you're on the phone and like everything happens perfectly. But most of us listening have worked in military planning cells at a very small level. And everyone that you talk to is like, yeah, it doesn't change much when you get to like the highest levels. It's not like suddenly the technology improves. It's bizarre to think of these probably captains and majors at the higher levels granting access to share drives, trying to get people, trying to like expand the triangle on the PowerPoint and enable that. I mean, Kyle, you did some planning, right? As an aviator.
Yeah, I mean it's not seamless. It does require like a ton of coordination and like rehearsals and syncing, right? And there's questions about like contingencies, and it's not like a integrated process for sure, right? Yeah, and it's it can be like surprisingly low tech as well, right? Like, and even aviation, like we have all this great like mission planning software, but it's still it can still be pretty low tech.
Yeah,
I think a lot about. Oh, sorry, or what?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Nate.
I think a lot about something I heard a long time ago is that we have this idea, almost like you talked about like Independence Day, that like people will rise to the challenge of an occasion, but more often than not, people fall back to like their best level of training. And if their best level of training is sort of the tactical tools they use in the PowerPoint slides that they're used to, or if that's like their daily rhythm, that's what they're going to use in an emergency. They're not going to like suddenly rapidly innovate or it's going to take some pain to do so. And so I think about like these, emergencies that are happening. It's obviously kind of easy to point at like the weekend. What are these nation states going to do? They're probably going to do what they've trained to do previously. Like the idea that they're going to like rapidly innovate on even their diplomatic or military decision thinking is probably pretty unlikely. And some of that is the tools they're using. And so that's kind of what consumes my thoughts a lot.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. I know you guys are pretty. I mean, we're talking to you and those who might not know One Brief. You guys are pretty well embedded in the U.S. and like actually have some pretty solid influence in other allied partners. So I think it's pretty cool, for you're in my opinion underselling kind of what the company's doing, and it's pretty cool. I mean, those of us that have been doing planning, it was super frustrating, and we all thought there has to be a better way to do this, and you guys seem to have figured that out. And continue to iterate. Obviously, I'm sure Grant, your CEO, would never say that the product is in its final form.
No, yeah. I mean, we are constantly thinking about both sort of micro ways to tweak it to make sure users know how to, use it better, and then sort of, the future of exponential growth is really powerful, and we think about future AI implications. I mean, the really kind of longer range vision that we think about a lot is someone's going to try and sell the DoD like an AI planning software at some point. I mean, I think that like we all kind of know that will naturally occur, but I think a really important question of that is like, what data is that AI planning solution trained on? And arguably, there's not a great amount of structured data to make that happen. And so one of the ways that we think about it is, well, like, don't you want your planners, like your professional officers, structuring that data? And that's really what OneBrief allows for at the user interface level. Like the way you're planning in OneBrief, which feels very natural and intuitive with sort of MDMP or JPP, joint planning process, things that we're kind of very used to. It now structures the data for sort of an automated future or a smart future, which is exciting to think about. Sort of keeping the decision-making cycle or speeding the OODA loop up as fast as conflict is occurring now.
Yeah, which is key. I mean, we saw this weekend, like I said, one of the unprecedented moments was seeing Iran, a nation, attack Israel for the first time in a long time. That is still unfolding, right? I think we were all very worried that Israel would be overwhelmed. And they largely weren't, because two countries, Saudi Arabia and Jordan, joined with the United States, who is an ally. But Jordan and Saudi Arabia both put assets into the air and coordinated with the United States. I mean, the CENTCOM commander was in Israel coordinating with these partner forces. And that was pretty surprising. I mean, maybe Jordan and Saudi Arabia would share intel before, I think when the first Gulf War happened, there was a little bit of that. But certainly they were not about to tell their people that, hey, we're defending Israel, like Jordan, Saudi. And that was a pretty major shift. Now, obviously, Saudi and Jordan are not friends with Iran. There's a whole regional dynamic, but pretty amazing that was happening. And you think about Iran's a bit of a paper tiger, in my opinion. Their military is incredibly weak. Their MO and their comparative advantage is funding terror across the world, and basically using very cheap options, to sucker punch people. But as a force-on-force fight, they're not very strong. So you think about how much better it would be with even more coordination and where that coordination is coming into play. Pretty exciting to think about, in my opinion. So Kyle, what do you think of this new regional dynamic? I was pretty shocked to see Saudi and like publicly saying they were helping Israel.
Well, two things. One, I didn't realize up until recently Israel was basically under European command, right? Like when the U.S. knew that, like the different combatant commands it has set up around the world, and they moved it under CENTCOM. I just always assumed it was under CENTCOM. And then two, I guess the Abraham Accords really paved the way for basically airspace usage, which was a big deal, right? Of saying hey, we can allow military flights between Arab nations and Israel. But yeah, I mean it's remarkable to see Jordan defending Israel. There was still Jordanian tanks remnants in the Golan Heights area from when they had their war. So Yeah, it's pretty crazy to see. I don't know. I guess like directionally, I guess that's like a good thing. Like you'd want them to be defending each other.
Yeah, you want them against Iran, Iran being a totally rogue revolutionary state. I mean, they fund a lot of terror in that region. The
Yeah,
Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas.
yeah. It's kind of like this, like different centers of gravity, right? Where they are like developing the Middle East, right? And it's like all against like Iran, right? Like there's a reason they kind of call it like, hey, there's like the axis of evil, right? Like Iran, North Korea, Russia, and you probably throw China in there. It's not really an axis anymore, but
I think, yeah, the George Bush call out for him, I think, what was it, Iraq, Iran, North Korea. So that's a
yeah.
blast from the past. Was probably like your plebe year, right, Kyle? Something like that.
Something
I
like
don't know,
that.
like 05, 04. I don't know. It was before, I guess it was before Iraq. So you were still like in junior high or high school.
Man,
I remember it.
04, 05.
Yeah, it was like 02, I think, when Bush said that.
That I remember the mission accomplished thing. I hadn't ended up at West Point yet. So.
Yeah, it was like 02, and Bush said, yeah, the axis of evil. Yeah, I mean, Iran definitely felt emboldened. They felt like, maybe they felt like, hey, the last few weeks, Israel and the US have kind of been a little bit at odds over this whole, Rafah invasion. Maybe this is the time we can test, right? And will the US like actually do much? I mean, credit to, the previous administration. That was a big deal with Mike Pompeo and the Trump administration to do kind of the Abraham Accords. And
Yeah.
Certainly President Biden, his administration this weekend did actually perform pretty well once things were going on. And hopefully is going to be able to have I think a diplomatic solution is probably what we should see. I think Iran kind of signaled this, and we don't want a massive regional war. That's not good for anyone.
No. I mean, I remember visiting Israel and like being explained like all the different complexities of the region. And I was like, oh yes, I can see if World War III was going to start. It would start here in Jerusalem. So
Crazy, man. It's like biblical level stuff.
And yeah, till you see it, you're like, oh, okay, I get it now.
So we'll continue to watch this. Obviously, like I said, it's a little scary because Israel says they're going to retaliate, and I don't know what that looks like. It's scary to think what happens, but we'll keep watching that, and we'll move on to a pretty nuts story that everyone seemed to engage with on the page. Nate, you're about to fall into a bunch of money when One Brief IPOs, and might I suggest that you take the millions you make from your IPO and spend 3.5 of it on a skyscraper in St. Louis. How does that sound? The biggest skyscraper, actually.
Yeah, I mean the monetary success will hopefully just be a proxy for our ability to sort of influence the quality of plants in the world. So I'll say that first. I actually really love that there's we talk a lot about incentives sort of internal to the company, and there's a real mission focus. And I know like a lot of companies say that, but there's something kind of quality about having about half the team being vets. And this even applies to a lot of the engineers. I mean, there's a financial incentive that's true for everyone at One Brief, but having the focus is meaningful. That being said, yeah, buying real estate in St. Louis doesn't appeal to me personally, but it is kind of crazy to think about the real estate market. I mean, I think about this in DC a lot, and just there's still companies that haven't gone back in person, just haven't needed to, and what that does to downtown areas. I think I was just in DC last week, and sort of Chinatown around the stadium. I mean, there's a lot of places not coming back to work, and I think you're starting to see a little bit of an economic dip as a result. So I don't know about this particular building though. You have to tell me more.
You're 100% remote though, right? At One Brief.
Yeah,
in a second.
we have our customer success team, which I'm a part of out here in Hawaii. Like we're co-located with the commands we work with, but our engineers, our admin staff, all remote. We meet up frequently to kind of keep those bonds in person, but yeah, everyone's remote.
So Kyle, what this building in St. Louis, the biggest skyscraper in St. Louis, and
yeah, the 44-story AT&T tower, which is, not a small building.
Right here. Yeah, for those that are watching on, it's a big building. Yeah.
I mean, it's a legit, skyscraper. And yeah, I think it said it last sold for like 205 million in 2006. And in 2022 it changed hands for $4 million, which is insane.
Yeah. $2 per square foot.
I mean, there are houses in my neighborhood, not mine, but there are houses in my neighborhood that are $4 million, right? You tell me you go buy a fucking skyscraper.
The townhomes in Carlsbad.
Yeah, the townhomes in Carlsbad.
1.4 million, like 1.3 million. So yeah, 3.5 million in nice cities.
I mean, literally, that's like it's got to be like scrap value. Like if you were to tear the whole thing down.
Yeah, you got to think. So I lived in St. Louis for 1 year prior to coming to business school. I was doing medical recruiting for the Army, which is an interesting job to try to do sales for an organization that doesn't comprehend performance incentives. But beside the point, St. Louis has this weird dynamic where the downtown is where the Arch is, or that's what everyone knows about St. Louis. It's where the Cardinal Stadium is, and there's all these skyscrapers. And it's like completely empty. Other parts of the city are actually pretty charming. There's a really beautiful Central Park with this amazing art museum. AB InBev is there, right? So, Anheuser-Busch and Boeing has the second biggest concentration there. So it's not all of St. Louis. And for anyone that's like considering a job in St. Louis, it has charm in parts, but the downtown area is just a disaster. I mean, they call it a death spiral because there's this chicken egg question, right? That no one wants to go to downtown because there's nothing to do. And there's nothing to do because no one wants to go downtown, including employees. And the commercial real estate market generally is seeing massive problems. Largely it hit during COVID. One of the reasons we haven't seen any sort of bubble popping or any sort of, really bad write down yet is because most of these leases for commercial space happen in like 6 to 10 year intervals, meaning that people during COVID decided we're not going to go back to the office, but they basically just ate the cost of like an 8-year lease. So that they signed in like 2018, right? It didn't come due until for like 2 more years. This building, I was still trying to figure out, I tried to look up and see if that was like debt was included, right? So if that's 3.5 million for equity, but it has like 50 million or 100 million in debt attached.
Yeah.
I can't find anything saying much about the debt. I have to believe there's some debt attached, right?
I mean, you'd think so, right? I know it just depends on who's the current owner, how long they've owned it, right? I mean, it's an old building, but
yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's the biggest office building, $3.5 million. I mean, yeah, the maintenance alone, like the maintenance on that building might be like $1 million or $2 million a year, like heating, cooling, just structural preservation,
like constant repairs, right? Security, insurance, all the things, right? Like it's got to be at least like $1 million a year.
Right. So if you're some real estate investor, I guess maybe you buy this and you think $3.5 million and it's going to cost me like $2 million to maintain, but you're taking a bet that maybe St. Louis in 10 years and 15 years rejuvenates. And like, I don't know that, how you discount those cash flows, but you're thinking, maybe in 15 years you can sell it for 300 million or something. There's probably someone that'll take that bet, but it's kind of a larger point about people not going back to the office. I know Google, where you were, Kyle, has kind of been coming back a little bit, and that seems to be the trend for a lot of tech companies. But Nate, what's it like? I mean, you guys have no office, right? There's not a headquarters building with a secretary or anything.
I'm calling you from the office. The apartment in Hawaii is the headquarters.
Where does your COO work? That's the craziest.
Norway. So he was originally our director for Europe and used Norway as a base of operations to go to Germany pretty regularly, and now he's pretty solidly in Norway. Yeah, I don't know what percent of the time, but most of his time. We started remote, so I think starting remote made it a lot easier to just stay that way. Because all this literally, I mean, it sounds simple, but the communication systems are just using Slack and knowing how to communicate that way just kind of come naturally. And if you start that way, it's just what normal is. Yeah, we meet up regularly, the team that's here in Hawaii in person, but yeah, the day to day is all remote.
You have people all over the world.
Yeah,
I mean, job
Korea,
listings.
yeah, Korea, Hawaii, all over CONUS from where you're going to be in San Diego to Florida, Germany, Italy, Norway, and then yeah, we're advertising right now for Australia. That's an exciting sort of future venture for someone, and continuing to grow in Korea as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
pretty exciting.
Middle
The
East.
Middle East. Yeah,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is on the horizon. Probably more than that too.
Ironically, we helped place someone into in St. Louis. So
Yeah,
you know, they'll actually be in like Belleville, Illinois, Scott Air Force Base. So technically across the river, but I assured him from living there that it actually was not this doom spiral. But ironically, yes, we just helped someone. So if someone's interested, reach out to us, because One Brief's a pretty cool place to work. Yeah, I mean, Kyle, where do you see the future of remote work going? Do you think people come back to these offices? Do you think we're at the height? Do you think we've returned as many people as will ever return?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like it's kind of permanently changed. I don't think there's ever going to be a full 5 days back in the office. Like, I have a hard time but I also don't think it'll ever be fully remote either. I think there's just going to be this continuum of companies where, for some it's going to work, and for some, the cultures, they're going to want to have like a certain percentage of people in.
Yeah.
And it's going to vary like on, I tell veterans all the time, right? Like people ask me about, well, what's the culture like at this consulting company or this company? And I'll be like, well, honestly, like you need to look at the industry more than the company, right? Like industries have like cultural norms, right? And each company is different, but like those companies kind of follow cultural norms. And I think there might be like, certain industries where it's like okay to like be remote, and or like certain size companies where it's okay to be remote, and other companies are going to like, hey, we want people in the office. And I think this is going to be hybrid. That's
what would
my
it take for you guys to say yes to a 5-day work week, like in an office?
For me.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't know. If they told me like, hey, you got to go in 5 days a week, like I would go in, right? Like I like my job. I think it depends on how much you like your job, how much you're making, right? Where you are at geographically, right? Like I'm not that far from the office, right? Like it's okay to go in.
Why will
Yeah.
you be working 5 days a week?
I just said yes to a 5-day work week. So
Yeah.
yes, for me, yeah, it was a pretty sweet offer that they gave me, and
Do you
being in
think some
San
of that's our
Diego.
background? Like we're used to 5 days a week in the Army, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say also, like, talking to industry, Kyle, the role that I'm taking is kind of a B2B software, hardware, utility tech play. It's private equity backed, but it's more kind of that software sales led operations. And while we are 5 days a week, like the CEO was like, yeah, we will be, you can, take Thursday, Friday off if there's like, your friend's wedding and you need to go. Like that's kind of what a lot of people do. Or, if you need 1 day a week, you have to go to the doctor and you're like, hey, it's a waste of my time to like drive from the hospital back to work. Like just go home and work, right? Don't be asking to like go remote for a month. And end of month is a big deal, right? Like in sales cycles, like he's like everyone's needs to be in the office the last day, the last week of the month, because that's like things get like we're closing deals, right? And we need everyone. We need the energy in the office. Like that's pretty typical for a lot of B2B SaaS companies that I know of, that they'll be like, hey, we're pretty remote, like we're pretty hybrid friendly most of the month. Like end of the month, at least the sales, marketing, like customer success teams, like in office closing deals, and it's like really high energy. So like 25% of the time. My friend's company, they're YC backed, they're B2B SaaS. they're not veterans, and they're 4 days a week in office, kind of hybrid friendly. So again, they don't work on Tuesday. And his attitude is the CEO. He's not a former sales guy. He still sells. He's the CEO. But he's like, look, my salespeople, he's like, I look at their metrics. They don't call as much on Tuesday. They don't work as much on Tuesday. Like outbound sales, it's not happening as much. So, and he's like, if I did it on Friday, at first they would do Friday, Tuesday at home. It's like Friday, no one worked. It was just a 4-day work week. And so he said, everyone's coming back in office. That's just the way we're going to do it. And I think it probably also depends on the stage of company you're at. If you can hire people that are super, super motivated, you're probably gonna have an easier time having them work from home, right? I mean, Kyle, you don't probably need to be in the office to feel motivation to work.
No, I mean, I could be working right now, right? Like there's always something to do, like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's, yeah, I mean, exactly. Right. Like it's going to depend from company to company, just, and like, yeah, you like, and maybe like an early stage startup that's really like iterating on something, right? Or it's like a hardware focused, right? Like maybe they really do need to be in the office 5 days a week. They need that energy together. So, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's just gonna be from company to company to company. But
so this kind of leads into the next topic, I think, which is we're kind of touching on compensation, which time, your time is definitely a form of compensation. Nate, you basically are asking that question, right? How much is your time worth? If you can work from home, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, you can travel the world. I know at One Brief, like one thing that we tell people that are thinking about working there is like, hey, they're not going to be, on your ass about coming into the office. If you feel like you want to go work that day from Colorado and then the next day from Texas, and as long as you're at the client, like you can do that. There's no office. And that's a huge deal for a lot of people because they're like, okay, so you're telling me if I'm present with the client, I can go and do something else and go like work for my parents. I'm like, yeah, that's what they do. Huge deal for people, but getting the right kinds of people is hard. Getting the right kinds of talent, you either have to pay a lot, you have to give other kind of benefits. So we saw this story this week about Walmart. A woman who's a manager of Walmart in Texas, store manager. She started actually in the camera department, making $240,000 a year, and she's on the right side of the bell curve. But Kyle, what's going on at Walmart? How are people making so much money managing a store?
well, I mean, these stores are massive, right? Like you've obviously ever been to Walmart, and like they have like they're massive money makers, and so you have like store managers who are responsible for like probably millions of dollars worth of P&L, like administrative, personnel stuff, making sure the store, like, I mean, and the Walmarts are like open, like many of them are open 24/7, right? And yeah, so you have like, some of these managers, like these general managers of these massive stores, clearing $240,000 a year, like we include like their base compensation and then like stock options, bonus, et cetera, right? But they're doing like, is interesting because they're doing like everything. Like it isn't just like they aren't just sitting up in like their office in like the back of like or like in the top of like that Walmart building. Like they're actively like walking the store, right? Being like, oh shit, like this thing's empty and it's got a price tag on it. Like we need to put something in there, like, get something in there, and like there's a mess here, right? And they're like, you know, in ensuring that people like show up to work and everything because they have like they have like a workforce that's like very large and isn't salaried, and so yeah, so it's like they're managing like a pretty complex operation, and like some of these managers like started from essentially like uh you know uh, doing stuff like, oh, like taking the rotisserie chicken out, right, and like putting it on like the
Yeah.
shelf. They just like learn the different jobs like within Walmart, and they're able to kind of like climb the ladder, which I think is great, right? Talk a lot about MBAs and like whatever, but it's good. You want like upward mobility where people can like have a career and grow, right? Like you start with
And,
individual tasks and work up to like leadership.
and you need people that know the company.
Yeah, they know the company, right? They've seen it. Like this is the thing you and I were talking about the other day, right? Where it was like, like job hopping versus like internal promotions, right? And it's like, you know, it was like you'll make more money, right? Like if
And you'll probably get a raise. You can probably leverage. You can probably jump from one job to another at a similar position, right? Same position, but get more money from another company. But you shouldn't jump to another job for a promotion. Normally you can't.
But it takes like 2 to 3 years to start to like fully understand like a company and like, because like you go join a company, right? It's not like, there's so much that goes on like back channel, like stuff that's not like official communications, right? Like understanding like what strings to pull, what levers to pull, like power centers within the company, how the company actually works. Like you've seen like a few cycles of it. You like start to understand like, okay, like you become more effective at your job, right? And so people who like stay at a company or are able to like grow within it are very effective at what they do, right? Like they have that like kind of like air sense of what's going on within the company.
Yeah. Nate, how long does it take normally for someone to get accustomed? I mean, when you've seen it at One Brief, I mean, I think a lot of people hope like, hey, I'll come in the Army. It's like you have these like 9-month periods, right? And you're expected to be like a professional within 2 or 3. In the civilian sector, I mean, how soon before someone feels like, hey, I know this company?
Yeah, great question. I kind of break it down into 3 domains. So the customer and the problem, we kind of hire for people who understand it, that know the military culture, know the problem itself, the planning problem. That's not always true. Like we're willing to take risks and hire people that we think can learn that if they're the right personality. So that's kind of like the thing to learn. You got to be able to, if you don't know it, pick that up pretty quick. But again, and planning's not rocket science. These processes are pretty easy to learn. The internal problem, like learning the app, couple weeks to months, probably to like really have it figured out to the point where you can teach it. I think that's kind of a reasonable expectation. But to like kind of the broader point that you talked about, Kyle, of like learning how things work internally that we don't really like communicate outside. It's probably a few months to just kind of know who's who. I mean, I didn't have a background in software at all. I'm still learning every day about how the engineers work and the complexity of how much time it takes to develop a certain feature in the app. So months to maybe years probably to like really have it mastered and figured out. I mean, I think we hire knowing we're investing in people to an extent in terms of understanding the company and then understanding the application in order to sell it, pitch it, and train it well.
Yeah, I think a lot of vets assume, given the way the military does it, where it literally is like a year and then you switch to a totally different function, a year, different function, like 9 months. I know people that are at like the 173rd where there's a lot of lieutenants there and they get like 9 months for PL time. And that's if you're a good PL. And it deludes, I think, a lot of vets into thinking that that's how you succeed. Whereas when you see this woman at Walmart, right, she's making more than almost every single MBA graduate from Wharton. I mean, I think with the top end bonus at like McKinsey, you're going to be making like 220. So maybe like investment bankers, but they're not living in Texas. They're living in like expensive New York City. So this woman is probably making 240 a year plus, probably 50K in stock from Walmart. And that's her cash comp was 240. And it says that like the highest earning store managers are making 400 a year. That's pretty fantastic. But I think it also
think about how much you'd have to pay to find somebody with that market knowledge. I mean, that's what they have, right? They've got market knowledge, store knowledge. You'd have to pay it a lot to find somebody comparable, and they still don't know the internal dynamics.
Yeah.
What's your like replacement cost? In monetary, and I mean it's like an outsized cost, right? Like like find somebody, right? It isn't just your salary, like it's like the actual like impact you have on the business, right? Because your salary is like a derivative of your impact on the business. Where it's,
And it also talks about how Walmart's doing this new focus where they used to be very big into, they had kind of layers, right? They had like middle managers. That's kind of a loose description, but it was these middle managers that were between, the store manager reported to like a regional manager, and the regional manager reported to like a area manager, and the area manager up and up and up, right? And Walmart was like, why are we paying Like, let's get rid of like two of those layers, each of whom is probably making, 500,000 a year or something, something ridiculous, and throw that back down to store managers and just make sure that they're compensated. But with that higher compensation comes this need for people that don't just execute. They now are asking the store managers to do a lot more strategy, right? They're asking store managers to actually start thinking like managers, which is, I think, that's kind of the soft skill stuff. Kyle, you've been now in this private sector for several years. Can you talk a little bit about why companies look for and how hard it is to find someone that's like a true manager as opposed to someone that is a very good individual contributor?
I mean, I think good management in the private sector is very dependent on, it's like, can you like build teams, right? Like, can you like identify like the right things for people to go afterwards, right? Can you like hire, can you manage, teams effectively? Which, like, if you're in the military, you're like, oh, that sounds familiar, right? But like, I think kind of the difference is that, like, to build like an actual team in the private sector, like, people have like, they can vote with their feet, right? It's very, there's a lot of like liquidity in like the labor market where people can leave, right? They're all in, they can be incentivized in ways that are, misaligned. And so you're trying to like get folks to like play together, and like work and like go in the same direction. And they want to be on the team, right? And you can keep them, you can keep them, you can, and you know how to use their skills properly. And that does require, like, when people say it's like very political, right? And like, and also interacting with other like managers as well, other leaders as well, who could be incentivized differently. Like, you could have like product teams or different functional areas, right? And they don't get along because they're not incentivized to like do the same thing, right? Like, yes, at the end of the day, they want like a company to perform well, right? But like, how are they individually incentivized? And I think that's a big part of it. And yeah, I mean, it's just, at least from the jobs I've worked at, like, everybody's like pretty highly paid, right? Everybody's pretty highly motivated. So how do you, like, there's no issue with like, can they do their job, right? Like, everybody's going to show up to work and do their job. Like, it's more about like, how can we like align efforts together to create the best output. And when you have incomplete information, um, and I think that's, creating an environment and the conditions to be able to do that is very challenging for any leader. Especially when like, you say you're not in the military, you don't have like UCMJ. Like, yeah, you can fire people, but these are all people who could also go get other jobs too. Right. Um, I mean, the best managers I've worked for, have some like shared qualities like good leaders you'd see in the military, right? Like, you create an environment of trust, right? They empower you. They invest in you. They want you to succeed, right? They have a high standard that they want you to meet, right? Like, they coach, they don't demean you, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but like, at the end of the day, like, it's still like, how can you align people to, where they want to do it, not where they're being told to do it.
Right, which is really hard, and you pay more. A lot of businesses want to get people on the cheap, and they end up with people. They end up asking people that are good at their tasks, like they're good at executing a checklist. They're not that great taking. In the military, we talk about taking intent, and creating tasks and having and helping coaching others to do those. Nate, how do y'all think at One Brief about this? I know you guys invest in talent. You are not afraid to pay top of market salaries.
Yeah, I think one thing is just sort of recognizing the talent that comes out of certain sectors in the military for sure. I mean, I like that you guys have posted that, hey, we're not looking just for sort of elite, I think would be kind of the colloquial term. Out there, we look for all sorts of types because there's exceptional people from all kinds of fields. So that's kind of the thing we look for most, is like, were they exceptional? Doesn't necessarily mean they came from a soft background or a submariner background, but were they exceptional in their field? And so a lot of the vetting comes from their experience in the military. And then our panel process and our screener process is all kind of sussing out exactly what you're talking about, Kyle. Like, hey, what are your motivations? What are you hoping to achieve? Because the monetary one's kind of real for everyone. Like, that's a baseline. But then you kind of need to figure out, like, okay, are you hoping to have like an outsized impact? Are you hoping to learn the private sector? Do you really want to learn startups? because these motivations could be very different. Some people want to live in a certain place. These are all, it's not a value judgment on any one of those motivations, but we try to figure out what those are in order to align it properly for the work itself. I just finished a book called Status Game. I highly recommend it. It's a British sociologist. He talks about how at the end of the day, like that's the overall kind of motivation we're all looking for, status. Sometimes money's a proxy for that, but not always. I highly recommend giving a read. It's made me really rethink both sort of the talent pool, what we're hiring, and like figuring out like what sort of status are they looking for, and then as well like my engagements with customers. Like, does the app threaten their ability to garner status because maybe they're already an expert in the process, and this app feels like a disruption to that, or maybe they need a tool to like kind of assist them in planning, and that'll give them more status. So I highly recommend the book for what it's worth.
Awesome. Yeah, Status Game. I'll add that to my Audible list.
Yeah.
So really good conversation here. Want to end today talking about interesting story. It was kind of like a case study in the Wall Street Journal that was really fascinating about Morris Chang. So he is the CEO of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. As the name implies, they make a lot of semiconductors. And right now, semiconductors are obviously a very hot commodity. And so Morris Chang started this company at 55 years old. So Morris Chang was not a dorm room founder. He was not Steve Jobs, who was 21, or Bill Gates, who was 19, Jeff Bezos, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA were 30. But Morris Chang has become fabulously successful. What exactly does TSMC do, Kyle?
They produce, help. They're in the semiconductor, basically business, right? And they do like semiconductor contract manufacturing and design. So I think it's like I'm trying to think, when you think about like the basically like value chain of like semiconductors, right? Because you have like companies that build the they build the machines that then build the chips, right? But like they're like, these are like two separate things. Like NVIDIA designs like computer, like these insane graphics cards, right? That they're then let's just call them AI chips now. And then you also have companies that build the the actual machines to like make those, right? And those are like actually like two separate industries. But like TSMC is they make semiconductors, right? So like they offer like a broad selection of like discrete semiconductors. So it can be everything from like transistors to like MOSFETs, like diodes, rectifiers, for like high voltage rectifiers, like all these like different like parts that go into like semiconductors and everything. So I had like a small like I did some like electrical engineering at West Point, like in my IT major, so I have like some familiarity with this, right? But yeah, they're a huge manufacturer of this, right? And they're a super interesting company. But like they're in, I think I posted a meme like a while back, and it was like real life Dune. It had like TSMC is like the Chome Corporation or something, right? So like they make in Dune, right? Like Chome is like the big corporation that like mines the spice, and so like TSMC would be like the big corporation in Taiwan that produces, semiconductors for that everybody uses, right? To then like integrate into their like
the spice
NVIDIA
must flow, right?
Yeah, like NVIDIA buys like TSMC products, right, to like build their computer chips, right? Which is why I'm trying to make the distinction between, I guess, there's like if you think about like the supply chain of like semiconductors, right? It isn't just like one company just like does like start to finish, right? Like there's this whole like they gotta like design, make the machines, right, and then make the semiconductors, and those semiconductors are like integrated into like actual like products like an H100 like GPU.
Yeah. So what's really fascinating about TSMC, that like you've said, they're huge, right? They are their recent market cap was $631 billion. So they're edging towards being a $1 trillion company. Very well might become that in the next 5 to 10 years. But Morris Chang didn't start this company in his dorm room. He didn't start this company, you know, on some idea and drop out of Stanford. And a lot of people would think, man, this is an exception, right? Morris Chang is not normal. I should, if I want to be an entrepreneur, start a company as young as I possibly can. The advice a lot of people give is, it never becomes easier if you have kids. But this Wall Street Journal article actually observes that that's not true. That most successful founders are actually between 45 and 55. And the very interesting, funny point that it makes is they say that while they might not have the ambition to believe they will change the world, they have the knowledge to know how they can. So this MIT Sloan professor, Pierre Azoulay, says there are ideas that you can only have once you've been around and you've had a real job. Those are not typically challenges solved by 20-somethings because you need to be up close, grow up, and be personal with the problems of a corporate customer to imagine a solution. The closer the industry match, the greater the success rate. So sorry to let down vets. I tell a lot of vets and a lot of business school students, like, if you have an idea, like, try a startup, especially in business school where like the risk is like really low, right? I've had ideas that I've tried to start. Won competitions here at Wharton, and like you come very close to the fact that it's incredibly difficult. So like, I'm not trying to tell anyone, right? I'm not trying to tell the next Steve Jobs to not start a company, but
I think like trying your hand and making money on your own is not like a bad thing, right? Like, SITREPs, is an entrepreneurial
it is.
like make money off of it, right? I've learned a lot from doing it. White's learned a lot from doing it, right? Dealing with customers, figuring out like, hey, how do we like structure deals, contracts? How do we like do business development? How do we produce stuff people want to see, et cetera? Like manage all that, stuff. It's all valuable, but like I do think about my wife's cousin. And people know me, they know that sometimes I reference this guy, and, he was, he graduated from Vanderbilt Law, and he basically was like a corporate lawyer, and was like in the healthcare REIT space, right? So real estate investment trusts. And he had a corporate career doing that. And, in his 50s, right, he went and he had the experience to like go get investors. Like, look, I know how to do this. There's a space we can compete in where these guys are not competing in. It's just, they're competing in a huge space, right? They're much bigger, but there's a niche of it that is the middle to lower middle market, like they're not competing in, and we can compete there, right? And they started a company and they raised money and they like IPO'd, and they've had a lot of success doing it because he's like just knows what the fuck he's doing, right? Like he's a professional, he has connections, he knows how to do the business, right? And they've made like oceans of money off of it. So, and it's just like, yeah, it's like,
he has the knowledge, right?
Yeah, has the knowledge, he knows what he's doing, right? So I mean, yeah, like there's something to consider, that like actually knowing what you're doing in industry. And like the company that I worked for before I worked at, Google, right? Like the guys who started it had been in like the hedge fund world, and like had already had a lot of success, right? Kind of the similar story, right? Like they knew what they were doing. So like professionalism and connections and the ability to raise money, like, when you lay it out like that all seems like a very obvious use case for being like, oh yeah, like of course this would make sense. But
like Morris Chang also, he was at Texas Instruments, did a lot of chip making for 30 years. And not only did he have the industry knowledge, but he was making, he said his goal in life, to take the next step was to be financially independent. For him, he said that meant $200,000 a year. And this was like in the 90s, right? So probably like 400 grand a year after tax. So he actually got these options from Texas Instrument, put them in municipal bonds, and was cash flowing like $400,000 a year personally. He said when he did that his wife and him were like, all right, we can now go try something incredibly risky. And he made TSMC, and now he's a multi-billionaire. So there's also the argument of like, if you have extreme financial security, you're not going to be making rash strategic decisions, and you can make, some pretty well-reasoned thoughts. Nate, you shared a little bit about kind of this idea of starting something later in life that I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, before we started recording, we were talking about this. There's Catherine Graham. She ran the Washington Post. Her father, Eugene Meyer, had this thing where he talked about his life in quarters. Like your first quarter, 0 to 20, is just to be a child. 20 to 40 is to learn. 40 to 60 is to build, and then 60 to 80 is to teach. And yeah, I've thought about that a lot with One Brief, because I think sometimes a startup is really just hopefully like a solution, but it implies the problem as well. And when you talk about like chips, I mean, that's a very complex problem. So it might take many, many years to like truly understand it. With military planning, I mean, our CEO, Grant Demery, he did 5 years after West Point, and he understood the problem deeply. He had enough reps and sets at it in those 5 years to be like, we need a different product for this. Yeah, I mean, the number of like pushes you have in life to like start something on your own, I think, is a combo of your risk calculus, your financial independence, and then just sort of the energy you have in life. But yeah, I think it's kind of neat to think about, especially as veterans, because you almost get like a later start in the market. Hey, you don't need to be 23 years old in a garage necessarily. It's not bad to be, but it's not the only model.
Yeah. And obviously, right, the entire point of like not waiting until you're in 50s or 60s, right, is to be able to consume more earlier, right? So it's like you a bunch of money, you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? But like, yeah, there's no set solution. I mean, like, I remember when you had to have a .edu address to be on Facebook, right? Mark Zuckerberg is like my age, and he's not doing podcasts that 500 people are going to listen to. He's
the thing I like that you guys drive people towards, because I mean, I think about this a lot when people are getting out into transitioning, asking your advice, and I don't want to misrepresent the advice you give, but like, especially coming out of the military, like the GI Bill, voc rehab, it's the safest bet to give yourself the most options. But the tension of that is, and I mean, I felt it a little bit of like, you want to get out and like do the next thing, but it's sort of this arbitrary timeline that like, you set for yourself. Do you guys encounter a lot of people who probably feel that way, or kind of, mention that anxiety when they're talking to you?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people think like, man, I need to get out. I need to make, I need to catch up. Like, you're around a lot of type A people, especially in grad school. And like I said, I think that if you do want to, like, it's like something to do in business school. You have 2 years where you're totally riskless, or law school, like any of these places, like you can fail and no one's ever going to even ask you about it. Like you don't have any career risk. So try it out, like do something like that, right? Just try something on the side. Like Kyle said, SITREPs, like this is an entrepreneurial venture. But man, if you want to do something like build semiconductors or do something crazy, like you better have some industry knowledge. Not only does it help you make the product, it helps you raise funds, it helps you hire, right? You're probably going to hire a bunch of your old friends. You talk about Grant, right? He had tons. He was 5 years into the 5-year subject matter, 4 years at West Point. Like he effectively had 9 years in the ecosystem, knew a bunch of people, identified people. Like he had buy-in from a lot of people. Now, if Grant had tried to go out and start a company with like decarbonization, probably be pretty hard for Grant to get into YC, for him to get into VC's offices. And certainly, I don't think, Nate, you would have been like, man, this guy, like, I'm gonna go work on this decarbonization problem with him.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, I think we sort of undersell our understanding of like the military market when we get out, and we probably oversell its applicability in others. And it's sort of an interesting sort of two sides of the coin. Yeah, I mean, he was getting out and with, like you said, 9 years of pretty much understanding the culture and the market. If a 21-year-old straight out of college was like, I'm gonna start a planning app for the military, but had no experience, you'd be a little like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, like it's taking on what you know. I think is very is like is a great piece of advice. Like people have been like, what? Like people have asked me like, oh, did you ever think SITREPs was going to get like big? And I was like, well, like, yeah, I did. And the reason I did was because like I knew what the pain point was, right? I knew the problems people were facing, right? So it was easy to hone in on those because you know what to talk about, right? And then like I also knew how to like just be funny. Like, so I knew the model would work, right? So like, if you understand something very deeply, there's like a good chance you can probably like build a business around it. I didn't say SITREP is not like a crazy business, right? But it is, a semi-notable, presence, right? And
But in a broad sense, it is a solution to a problem that existed, which was
yeah,
like totally fractured information.
mhm.
Everyone's dealing with the same problem. Yeah, like
Yeah, right.
everybody's transitioning in this phase where you guys do kind of have market knowledge now and consolidated it in a cool way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it's like, do what you know, right? And like, if that is something like right out of the military, it's not a bad idea. Or
I emailed you guys. I don't know if you saw it. Why this meme that I always come back to, which is like this bell curve of which is like make something people want, and then the top of it is like, no, you've got to assess the market and like build a moat and do all this sort of modeling, and then like it's like, no, just make something people want, and like people wanted the information you guys have. It's like
yeah.
Yeah.
Product market fit is a big deal.
Here's the meme.
Yeah, there's
yeah, left side of the bell curve is the really dumb person saying just make something people want. The right side of the bell curve is the Jedi saying just make something people want, and the middle is the crying normie saying no, you can't make a product unless you first clearly define your moat and market structure, including modeling and incumbents in the field over the next 5 years, and then overcomplicating it.
I mean, you
don't know what people want
think,
unless you're in there.
How many of those like transition companies like overthought how to like market to JMOs? That's not your only like the people you only reach out to, but like I used to get all those emails and like it was never very helpful. It wasn't unhelpful, but it like just didn't feel like it was like the place to go to get information.
Generally not, yeah. And a lot of the times, I sent Kyle this meme that we'll probably put up soon, and it says like, never ask a woman her age, a man his salary, or a military transition guru their relevant civilian sector experience.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true, right? Like, until I think you've been and you've done the private sector thing for a little bit, right? Like, I like to use the term put on your oxygen mask before you help others. It's not a bad thing, right? Like, military folks are super altruistic, like they want to help each other, but you gotta kind of know the rules to the game before you can help folks.
100%. And not a bad thing to like get some knowledge, right? Before you try and go out and pontificate and send everyone your Substack and talk about the view from your foxhole. Maybe dig your foxhole a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Dig the foxhole a little bit deeper, and then people will take you more seriously. So
you'll have a clue, right? You'll actually know what the heck you're talking about. So before you tell everyone else stuff. So anyway, Nate, thanks so much for coming on. Any parting thoughts?
Thank you guys. No, I mean, I want to just appreciate what you guys do. I viewed going to grad school the kind of the same way you guys did as an opportunity to kind of reassess myself and what to do next, and benefited from the stuff you guys put out, and love sharing what you guys are doing now, both for people who want to join a startup or want to go to school. So just appreciate you guys doing this and making it fun. I mean, that's kind of the edge you guys have, is that you keep it funny, keep it light and interesting. And so happy to be here. And
no one wants to be lectured to, for sure.
No. And so, quick plug though, if people want to apply or learn more about OneBrief, please hit me up from Nate at OneBrief. Very easy email. But they also can get in touch with you guys and filter themselves that way. So, thanks a lot, guys. This was fun.
Yeah, Nate's a cool guy. So yeah, let us know. We'll try to get him to hire you.
Yeah, if anybody's in Hawaii as well, we can do meetups here. Super easy. So.
Oh yeah. If you perform really well, maybe you can become a director in Hawaii. So I promise we don't place everyone in St. Louis.
No, San Diego we'll be hiring for too. It's a great city. So yeah, great spot.
Great. So. Kyle, any parting words of wisdom?
No. Check out the SITREP's forums if you have questions, because I'll if you need help or you have a question, I'll screenshot it and post it. Somebody will reply.
Yeah, we have some solid engagement. So shout out to Zach Carper. That dude's a wizard. Him and Tim Nauday.
Yeah.
So thanks, Zach and Tim. All right. Well, we'll talk to you next week, Kyle.
Cool. All right, guys. Have a nice night.
Appreciate
it.